Hello. Hey, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be. I've been in Portugal for a week now, and it's just been amazing visiting. So thanks for having me. First show of hands, who here has contributed to an open source project before? There's a few folks. Cool. Quite a few folks actually. So what I want to talk about tonight is kind of my own personal experiences growing a few open source projects like Yargs and NYC, and kind of my experiences getting a little burned out trying to build them. And I just want to kind of try to give some of my learnings and try to give encouragement to folks to get into open source and try to help people avoid the burnout situations that I've found myself in before. So as mentioned, my name's Ben. I'm a product manager at NPM Incorporated. I was actually one of NPM's first few employees where I was hired to do operational work. So I was actually doing a lot of work on CouchDB when I was first starting my job. But I've gradually kind of moved into doing more of a product management role, as seen doing stuff like with Andre on the NPM search project was one of my first things I really product managed there. You can find me on GitHub at /bco, and you can find me on Twitter at BenjaminCo. So I don't want to talk too much about work tonight. I want to talk about my experiences with open source, and specifically around managing open source communities. So my projects that I'm most proud of are Yargs, which is a command line argument parser that basically you give it command line stuff and it gives you a really pretty UI out the other end. NYC, which is this command line tool that if you write unit tests, it lets you run your unit tests with NYC, and then it tells you how much of your code base your unit tests exercise, so you know if your unit tests are doing a good job of exercising your whole code base. Through my work on NYC, I gradually kind of took over developing Istanbul, which is just the tool behind the scenes that does all that instrumentation. I work on that with a few other folks. And then finally, I work on this neat thing called standard version, which I encourage people to take a look at it. Basically, you write standardized commit messages, and then it can automatically generate a changelog for you and give you recommendations for your next version you bump stuff up to. I use it for all my projects, and I think it's really neat. So over the years of working on all that stuff, I've got to the point where I have tons of people downloading my stuff, and I'm really proud of that. It's exciting. But that didn't happen overnight. It was after years of working on these projects. So I actually picked out this. I've been reading on vacation this book called The Stand all week by Stephen King. It's pretty good. But I found this quote in the start of the book that I thought was pertinent to open source, which is, when asked, how do you write? I invariably answer one word at a time, and the answer is invariably dismissed, but that's all it is. So with my experience with open source is very similar. It's like you work on stuff years over years over years, and if you're diligent about pulling in pull requests and addressing issues, you will gradually grow the open source project over time. It's just you need to have the time to actually put that time into the project. I'm going to talk about that in a little bit, because not everyone has time. So growing an open source project is very much a marathon. It can take years of dedication. But what I was kind of left asking myself over the past couple years, especially as I approached feeling a little burned out on some of my projects, is why am I doing this? So why have I spent years building the Yargs, the command line argument parser? Like, what are my motivations? So I definitely have some altruistic motivations. Like, I'm not a purely evil person. I enjoy building community. It's really fun to be able to combine my love of people, like meeting people like I am tonight, and my love of programming. Like something like Yargs, I can have a 34 thread long conversation about whether we should add a new feature to Yargs, and that's very nerdy community conversation about command line argument parsing. It's neat. I also really love teaching and learning. I've always had a passion for trying to teach people things. When I was first learning how to program as a kid, I'd always drag my mom into my room when I was 12 or 13 and have her try out my programs and see if she could figure out how to use them, and would try to make the UI better for her. So I've always had this, and I've kind of always had that passion for teaching people things. I also find that running open source projects, I get forced to learn a lot, which is really nice. Like with Istanbul, I'll constantly learn about new JavaScript features I've never used before, because people want to cover them with coverage. Like I just learned the other week that you don't have to have an error caught anymore in a catch in newer versions of V8, which I didn't know until someone made a pull request with that. So I'm constantly learning running these open source projects. It's also really fun to build useful things, and this was what motivated me to kind of apply for work at NPM. It's this great ecosystem of these kind of Lego-like building blocks, and it's really neat to be able to contribute building blocks into that ecosystem. But when I was thinking about this talk, it's not just positive things that have driven me to do open source. It's there's negative aspects to my motivation as well. I definitely have an ego, and I'm excited to see how many dependents my library has or how many downloads my library is getting. Like that's definitely been a driver for me over the years. What companies are using my library. What it came down to is, I have confidence issues. I wanted to prove myself. I wanted to show I could build something that people used. That's not really the most positive motivation to do something. I also have a fairly addictive personality. So, I used to get addicted to MMOs. Now open source programming has become my new MMO. So I frequently will stay up late programming rather than going out with friends, or, there were times when I was using programming to forget my wife's illness. My wife was going through chemotherapy, and instead of thinking about it, I'd be up until 3 a.m. in the morning programming, basically. And at the end of the day, what it came down to was I was not taking enough breaks. So as you're not taking enough breaks, you're tired. The pressures from the community when you're working on open source can become more daunting. So you'll have people run into your project. They've never even met you before. And they're like, okay, when are you going to land this feature? I asked for this a month ago. How have you not landed this yet? Well, I'm working on this in my spare time. It's not going to be landed anytime soon. Or they'll just say, how is Istanbul not a monorepo? I don't even know what a monorepo is when people first started requesting this. And then you have people ask, how did you not think to do this thing you didn't even know existed? Or this would frequently happen to me. I'll release Istanbul without knowing that there's an upstream dependency like Jest, and then suddenly 50,000 people from Jest are opening an issue on Istanbul, and I don't even know Jest uses it. And so you have this constant kind of pressure that you can let get to you when you're working on open source. So when am I going to land feature X? This is my inbox from when I was working on this talk today. I've got 541 unread messages. So I'm sorry, but it's going to be a while before I land that feature because I haven't been reading. I've been in Lisbon for a week. This one comment wasn't to me. This was I just thought this was funny because I've never had anyone be quite this offensive to my open source projects. But this is the kind of stuff people randomly do in the community. At the end of the day, all those anecdotes aside, I basically found a year or two ago that I was getting to the point where I really felt like my negative motivations, like these people forcing me to land pull requests, or my own ego, or all these negative things, were kind of driving my work on my open source projects more than my love of programming, or my love of teaching people, or my love of meeting new people. And at this point, I really felt like I was on track for burning out on these various projects. I then had a tragedy in my life at the start of this year. My wife lost her fight with cancer, and at the start of 2018, my wife passed away. So basically, I was already feeling a little burned out working on open source, and then you have this life tragedy happen, and you're like, where you're really left is like, what do I actually value? Like you're asking, and I'm not talking about work or open source. I'm talking about, do I value friends? Do I value my interests? Do I value my family? Do I value open source? You just get put in this position when you have a tragedy in your life where you really have to start questioning what things in your life you value. And did open source even fall on this list? So, to be perfectly honest, I was really excited to come give a talk at OPO.js, but when I had not really started writing this talk when I started taking my vacation, and I was figuring I have a week-long vacation. I'm really going to figure out what I actually value about open source while I'm on this vacation, and I'm going to come and I'm going to give a great talk about it. And then at the very start of my vacation, all that started happening was people started bitching about how horrible open source was. So this happened on the first day of my vacation. This fellow, Joe McCann, puts on GitHub. GitHub is the de facto source for validating top talent the world over. Resume or CV, please show me your GitHub profile, commits you've landed, projects you've forked, code you've released. This created a real lively conversation on Twitter and the open source circles about, is this actually an appropriate point of view about what people should be contributing in open source? So you had some people saying things like, this ignores the large majority of devs who work for companies that have, proprietary code bases, can't possibly write open source. Or, the one thing that open source contributors have publicly accessible, the one thing that open source contributors with publicly accessible projects have in common is this: discretionary time and lots of it. Or probably one of the most extreme ones by Marco Rogers. So many white dudes who define themselves by their identity as a programmer are so mad about this GitHub resume thing, so mad. And I got thinking I had started having feels. One, I want to write a talk about how valuable I think open source is, and I don't want the whole community to be thinking about how shitty open source is throughout the week. But true, this really made me start, questioning, like, I already kind of am having trouble defining what I value about open source. Is open source actually an altruistic thing that I should care about? And I have undoubtedly been privileged. I've almost always had access to a computer. I have a workplace that supports my work in open source. The NPM will let me open source almost anything I want open source. And I've traditionally had downtime to work on open source. This was actually, when my wife got sick, this was one of the things that I was finding I really struggled with, is that if you have a sick family member, or if you've just had a kid, or if you have any of these big life things, one of the things you really quickly lose is any downtime at all in your spare time to work on these sorts of things. And it's a real privilege to have this downtime to work on things like that. So I was just kind of left asking, okay, is open source something worth valuing? Well, I think it is. It's helped give me a lot more confidence as an individual. Like it helped me feel more confident, and I don't think that's a bad thing. It's okay to feel good about yourself. I think it's undeniably helped my career. It helped me get my job at NPM, even if people on the internet are saying you shouldn't look at GitHub. And it's helped me meet amazing people all over the world. Like I wouldn't be in Porto right now if I hadn't been doing open source work with Andre, and that's pretty awesome. And I encourage other people to kind of explore that. I'm going to give another anecdote from close to the start of the year, similar to coming to talk at Pólo.js. Every year I've been going to this hackathon mentorship thing at the University of Illinois, where they basically bring in open source maintainers from all over the country, and they come to the University of Urbana and they help mentor college students to learn how to do open source development. So I'd already signed up to go this year, and my wife had died 3 weeks prior. And I was like, I was really on the fence about going. I was in the middle of dealing with grief. I'm still in the middle of dealing with grief. And you're like, should I be going to Chicago and mentoring students about open source stuff? I'm really happy I decided to go, because I met some amazing students, and they were super excited about getting to work on these open source projects. And it turned out to be a really positive experience for me. And it was great that my open source gave me this ability to go meet a new community of people and go to a new place and do something really positive during a really shitty time in my life. So open source did that for me. So what I want is more people to have these positive experiences in open source. Myself, I want to concentrate more on my positive motivations for writing open source software. So I want to try to put down, the crummy things that motivated me to write open source software, and to pick up better the positive things that led me to work on open source software. And at the same time, I really would like to do my part to address the problems in the open source world that lead to discussions of discrimination in open source, or privilege in open source. I really want to, you're never going to eliminate that stuff completely, but I'd like to, as a human being, do my part to improve that situation. So kind of re-summarizing some of the things I feel that drive me that are positive in open source, I really want to continue to help build healthy communities around open source. And ways that I've done this are encouraging inclusive behavior. So have a code of conduct for your open source project. Don't let people just go around being jerks to each other. Have an actual code of conduct like you would for a conference that says you treat people properly at the conference. Also lead by example. Have kind interactions yourself on your issue tracker. Be good to people on your issue tracker, and just lead by example. Make feedback easy. You want to make it easy for people to give you feedback, because then you're less likely to have it bubble to the point where someone's swearing at you on Twitter. So to do this, I have monthly triage meetings now, where anyone from the community can join a video call, basically, and start to give their feedback on my open source projects. And I also have a community Slack folks can join, so you can go just chat with people real time, which I think is really valuable. I also try to give a lot of responsibility to other people in the community. So this kind of fits in with my talk about ego. Like, I've taken all of the personal projects I've written, and I've moved them into orgs. So people won't even necessarily know I'm one of the key figures behind them, because they're interacting instead with this organization, like the Istanbul organization. And I think that's healthy, because you move it away from concentrating on the individual and to a group of people working on a project. In the same vein, I like to kind of be liberal about promoting leaders. And when I'm promoting leaders to projects, I'm looking very much more at someone's interactions within the community. Are they being kind to each other? Are they, are they being responsible? Are they good in Slack? More so than have they built this giant refactor of the code base. It's more important that they're a good community member. I also want to, in my projects, foster a culture of teaching. One great way to do this is to provide thoughtful code review. So regardless of, if someone comes in and they're obviously a fairly new software developer, they don't have much experience, the worst thing you can do is provide an obnoxious review where you just call out all of the little mistakes they've made in their source code. That's horrible. People are coming into a community with different skill levels. Treat this as a teaching opportunity. In a polite way, explain how you would rate the code differently. In a polite way, bring people up to your level. Don't bring people down. I also really like events like Hack Illinois. I'm definitely going to go to it next year if I'm invited. I think it's neat to have these events that help teach students about what open source is exactly, rather than just always preparing students for the industry. There's also something on the Node.js project happening right now called the Node.js Mentorship Project. This is kind of similar to Hack Illinois, and it's basically the Node.js project itself is trying to bring in a set of people to mentor folks and help them get their first pull requests into the Node project and what have you. I think this is really neat. And I think it would be great for other projects in the open source world to do things like this where they really emphasize mentorship. So how do I make sure, all this aside, excuse me, all this aside, how do I make sure that we actually are building useful things? Because that's why we're rating open source. Some of this does come back to community management, like help folks land their pull requests. My coworker, Rebecca, says, pull requests, way more important than issues being opened. Because a pull request shows that someone's interested in contributing to the project, help them get their first contribution landed. And also, I'm a product manager now, so of course I'm going to say this, but wear your product manager hat. Like, I want to land features on Yargs or Istanbul that actually move the product forward and have an actual application. Like, if you can come to me and say, hey, my company needs to use Yargs for this, it's like really compelling to me, and I might even go home that weekend and hack on the feature for you, because it's exciting to get new features in my product. How do you not let those community stresses get you down? Well, one thing, of course, is triaging issues actively as best you can. That's why I have that monthly meeting. And explain why things might take a while. Explain that it's just one person working on the weekend. Like, just polite explanations can calm people down quite a bit. Also, actively direct users to Slack or the meeting, as I was saying. Like, Slack can be a better way to have a conversation instead of 20 issues back and forth. And I guess furthermore, just don't take things personally. Like, people occasionally swear at me on the internet about random stuff, and I just don't swear back. Like, whatever. You're kind of a sociopath if you're just swearing at a random person on the internet. So moving to a healthier, that says pace. Moving to a healthier, you can tell I was writing these slides right up to the talk. Moving to a healthier place has done wonders for me with regards to how I approach open source. It's still a meaningful part of my life, but I feel way less burned out because I'm letting my inbox be at 500 issues. But I'm taking steps to get it down over time, and that's all I can do as a human. So for folks in here who didn't put their hand up or who would like to get more involved in open source, I encourage you to do so. It's fun. I feel like it's helped me meet people all over the world. It's helped my confidence. It's been a great experience for me all around. I feel it has helped my career. But don't put up with people treating you poorly, and seek out mentors. And feel free to ping me. I think my Twitter and everything is on this meetup, so don't be shy about talking to me. And that's all I have to say. So, thank you.